I was ordained an Episcopal priest on the cusp of the 21st century. Literally, in January of 2000, I became an Episcopal priest. And I had been prepared and educated, and I was ready to serve a church in which I was going to serve one congregation after another. In my mind, my vocation, my career was going to be about serving one group of people, a set congregation with the building that had been there for decades, maybe centuries, and had a set of programs, set of outreach. They did a stewardship drive every year, and they had one salaried clergy person after another over the course of their life, and maybe a small other staff, and everything was supported by the life of this one set congregation. And I imagined I would serve 2 or 3, maybe 4 of those congregations in the course of what I imagined would be my 30-year career as an Episcopal priest. That's not exactly what happened. Well, I did. I served 3 congregations. And as I did serve each one of those wonderful congregations, I began to see how each one of them in certain ways was struggling with basically how to keep the system alive. Things were not working the way they should. I felt that I and the parishioners and other clergy and staff were constantly being bogged down by the actual administrative and institutional things that we had to do, like setting budgets and dealing with the buildings and dealing with property, and that the decline in attendance that started well before I got there, but continued to put pressure on the ability of the church to be able to produce things like children's programs and other kinds of programs for its members. And it just felt like we were in this constant struggle that actually was standing in the way of being able to engage deeply with our spiritual lives and to help people grow in their spirituality and discipleship. And it was hard and frustrating. And in so many ways, I thought it was my fault that I wasn't trying hard enough, and the congregations thought it was their fault that they weren't trying hard enough. But in fact, it was so much systematic and cultural change over these past few decades, and absolutely during these past handful of years, that has made this harder and harder. And so after I served with 3 different congregations, and then I served on the staff of the Bishop of North Carolina, the Episcopal Bishop of North Carolina, and I served as sort of an in-house consultant for about 60 small congregations and the clergy who served them. And I began to see that these issues were so widespread, that there was so much stress and so much discouragement around people, and we had to close so many church doors, and so many clergy worried about their jobs, but mostly we worried about the spiritual difficulties of basically serving in this institutional mode and not being able to serve the way we were called to bring people more deeply into their walk with Jesus. And so I decided there had to be a better way. There has to be a way to take what we do as church, worship and prayer and study and faith practices and service and caring for our neighbors and loving God and believing, that we had to be able to take these things and see if there were ways in which we could serve them that weren't necessarily in a set congregational model that is more or less about being the CEO of a small nonprofit organization. So I started my own ministry, and I called it Free Range Priest. And I did that at the beginning of 2016. And since then, I've been on this journey of discovering how others and how I myself are doing what I call creative ministry. So creative ministry is what I like to call faith practitioners and clergy consultants who take aspects of our life as a church and use the entrepreneurial model to bring them to people who are in traditional congregations, and also directly, especially online, with people who may or may not belong to a specific congregation, as generations of people are no longer coming to church and are no longer familiar with church or with discipleship and how much they are beloved by God. And of course, there are still clergy who are serving congregations, and there are still many congregations that are thriving, and also those that are struggling to thrive in today's church. And so the question becomes, how do we serve in new ways within the institution, within the congregational model? And I think in so many ways we can learn from those creative entrepreneurial clergy who are out there finding their own kind of ministry niche and serving directly with individuals and also with congregations. First of all, we can learn from them directly. I think in today's church, we have ways in which we can work with clergy who provide things like retreats or online formation programs, or who might be available to assist even with worship, with preaching, with digital ministry, who can support us in our ministry that we are doing with congregations. Also, I think from within the congregation, from the place where we are serving congregations, we can rethink and reimagine how we are doing that. I think that there are 3 ways in which we can reimagine how ministry happens within and beyond the congregation. I think we need to think about ministry that is creative, sustainable, and digital. So creative ministry to me means just any kind of way in which we connect people to their deepening relationship with God and in new ways. A lot of the ways that I think that we can think about creative ministry within the congregation is to ask ourselves clearly, do we need to be doing this with whatever we are doing? And is this bringing us closer to our relationship with God? And to really take a close look at things like our various programs, the kind of meetings we go to, and even the way that we as clergy interact with our congregation, and how or why or if we think we are in charge of the congregation or doing ministry alongside of the congregation. This is what I mean when I think about creative ministry, how we might think about what we're doing differently, especially in this present age. Then there is sustainability. And for entrepreneurial clergy, for clergy who are going out solo and doing ministry that they offer to individuals or also to congregations or other communities, that's going to look like a true business model where you offer something, some kind of consulting or coaching or teaching or retreats or some kind of product, and you get paid for it directly. For congregations, they can actually do the same thing. Congregations can offer things. You can offer an online Bible study. You can offer a series. You can offer spiritual reflections, all those sorts of things. You can offer those directly to others. You can form groups online, and you can charge money for that to happen. You can also look into sustainability in terms of having a subscription model. Now we can have members that belong only online. Even if we're meeting in person, we can still have online membership, and people can be invited into groups or prayer groups or fellowship or any kind of online event or even in-person event, and pay a subscription fee like you do for Netflix or Amazon or something like that to be a part of our congregation. However we look at it, sustainability is a huge issue for congregations because I think our model of stewardship is not working and has not worked for a really long time. And it's another thing that puts pressure on congregations and clergy for congregations to have to basically come up with all of the money that it costs to support a congregation, all of its programs, clergy's salaries, other salaries, and everything that we do. That model is not working in today's church. And so it becomes incredibly important to think about things in terms of sustainability. It also makes us think about how we serve with congregations. And does every clergy person need to be salaried? Can we serve on contract? Can we be paid in a task-based way? Can clergy think about serving 1, 2, 3, 6, 10 congregations, especially being able to serve digitally in ways that allow it to be sustainable for a clergy person's life and also for the life of a congregation. And finally, of course, digital. We all have become digital natives now, right? The last few years have brought us all online as the church. And what's really, really interesting, I think, about this day and age that we are in as the church is that it is way beyond live streaming our worship now. There's so many digital tools and digital platforms and equipment that allow us to gather, to teach, to share, to become community, to serve, and to enjoy one another and our life with God together, that today's church is invited into a whole new digital landscape. Scary for some people. And yes, it is true that most people in our congregations are older, and a lot of people are put off by a lot of this digital stuff. They don't do social media. They don't want to do Zoom church, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, our lives are being transformed digitally in so many ways. And the church cannot be left behind in these ways in order to share the gospel more fully into the world and in order to serve the people that we already serve. Things like church data management, platforms where we can share online classes, ways in which we can keep in touch with one another, things like this. All sorts of new platforms are happening every day that we can employ as clergy, as church administrators, as community founders, as digital ministers. The list is practically endless. Not only that, but technology gets easier to use and more ubiquitous every single day, which actually makes it more available and more affordable for all of us. So this is just a quick introduction of who I am, what my ministry is. I am going to ask you to think about your own ministry, whether it's congregational or whether it's entrepreneurial or whether you serve in a different way or you'd like to serve in a different way. I'd like you to think about your own ministry and the ministry of those around you and think about a couple of things. One, how is it that you are feeling this systematic stress of the decline of the traditional congregational hierarchical ways in which we do church that worked in the mid 20th century that we're struggling with today? How are those impacting how you serve, and how are those things impacting the community that you serve with? And then to think about these areas, creative and sustainable and digital, and what those mean to you, and ways in which you already are thinking about your ministry in these ways, and also ways in which both you want to learn more and maybe you're a little bit put off about these categories or ways of reimagining ministry. In my ministry, I use the tagline, the future of church. Also, bring church to people. Those are the two things that I think define what it is that I do in terms of my own ministry. And I sometimes get pushback on this when people say, you call it the future of church, and it makes it sound like the future of church might be up in the air. And I say, you know what? It's because I think the future of church is up in the air. And it's not that I think that the church, the body of Christ, those of us who are followers of Jesus, are going anywhere, because I don't. And I also think that the institutional model of how we do church is in no way assured and may well be gone sooner than we think it is, or transformed to the place where we no longer recognize the model that we started using in the mid 20th century. I don't think that's necessarily a truly bad thing. I think there's going to be things that we are going to mourn about it. I also think we have more opportunities than we think right in front of us today to start changing our mindset and changing the way we serve in order to live into the future of church in ways that are thriving and are bringing more good news to more people. And I can't wait to talk about it with you.